twin, a mirror in him and they in her, reflecting the twin off particles that isolate instances, escape, encapsulate within a mirage. Aspects of self are divided. My past haunts my present. Lingering in dreams, memories, and manifestations, I birth ghosts and demigods through each day. This too is a ghost, a reflection from the origin. I watched as the sand moved by my finger, altering environments. My essence fractures off the past. I become an onion who peels when observed. In some ways, this video is to a ghost. About to get real meta, but I think what hauntological experiences mean to me is like being aware of the fractions of the self. I think like a cultural example would be how Voldemort in the Harry Potter series basically like crushed his soul into I think it's 8 pieces or something like that. And in a way, like, I think there are aspects of myself in this society and in these things that are a part of me. They're like reflections and refractions. So like, what age does this happen? And I think just a brief moment of understanding and clarity is that I think during the mirror stage and like Lacan's thinking is that once you see yourself in the mirror, you know yourself an object as like, well, you're able to understand yourself more as an object. And I think this is where the point where your sense of self and identity becomes fractured. But in many ways, it's very complex upon that. I think that's for the individual to think about, but for other people that are observing the person, like, so if a baby understands how to look at itself through the mirror and realize it's a person, it individually knows that like there is like this other thing, this physical body to this like mind. But the parents had also known this child, so there, in many ways, it goes from the birth of consciousness, but to experience. But I guess in many ways, not a lot of people understand the framework that goes into it. But I think it's something that's very like interesting to think about. Through reflection off this hauntological experience within technology, social media captures like a form of myself, but not necessarily a form that is the true origin. And I think through reflection, the power within understanding this framework is that there is basically, it is a cause and effect, but it's more than that. There are forms of myself that are entwined within other people, and aspects of myself that are entwined within the environment. And I think that understanding this, it's almost very daunting, because it's like I have so much power to act morally and care about my environment and love the people around me and validate and like show maybe, I guess I've been reading the Tao Te Ching, and they've been talking about spiritual cultivation, and I think in many ways it is kind of like that. I think there has to be a lot of aspects that because in many ways it's almost dystopian to think about, because there's very like little leeway within immoral actions, even such as cursing and stuff like that, because it's like these things affect people, and they affect other people that might think cursing is the devil, or aspects that are unpleasing, and it seems like these reflections of myself, in order to make sure these ghosts don't haunt me and stuff, I have to like act morally. Like, I already feel like generally I'm a good person, but I think it's like almost like now I finally understand why. Like, instead of just being told, I've been understanding why. Yeah. I guess to clarify, in some ways I've always known that it's been good to act good and to show love and compassion, because the Bible told me and like my parents told me and stuff. But I think this hauntological experience really shows the multitude and the importance of it, and how it's reflected within social media, such as the third space and the news sphere and other realms where consciousness resides. In many ways, these footprints are remnants of ghosts. Treadmills, some kind of bike or something. Which is why the investigation into this digital age is something that is almost unseen, because in a way, like social media, it reflects, it fractures more than these prints, than these footprints that show the actor and the agent in society. 5 years ago, I had helped plant these trees for a project, and when looking at these trees, it reminds me of a past identity or a fracture, which in the terms of hauntology reflects to a ghost. But it doesn't matter too much what other people see, because they don't have the bond. They don't have the bond associated with the tree to decode. I also feel that in many ways these ghosts that inhibit are only important if you have a bond. If there's like a bond through material means or through emotional means, or maybe a psychological way too. But that essence of having a bond, because I could be observed by kids playing, like when I went on this walk, but they're not gonna look at me as a fracture of my identity, because at some sense they don't even have an understanding of who I am. And I guess in some ways, from the main idea from Serial Experience Lane is that this identity isn't formed until you are aware of my presence. So in some ways, for example, since my audience will know who Christopher Willie is, in essence, he did not exist before I met Chris. Like, I did not have the knowledge of Chris' existence. So therefore, there wasn't a possibility to have a representation of his identity, a fracture of his identity within my mind. And I think that's why it goes on to explain why it's important to act ethically and show love and compassion, is because what if that's like the only time I would have met Chris is like in art at UWM or something like that in one class, you know? And it's like this some way there are impacts that I'm not even too sure of my identity, my existence. I don't necessarily really care if I will ever know those things, but they exist. Like I said in that poem, I move the sand, I alter the environment. And I think also the importance of engaging in posthuman ethics is to understand how to occupy and maneuver a world full of quote unquote sin and evil, and how aspects of ghosts and your refractions of your identity can have influence and possess in like a term not necessarily of manipulation, but in a way that it kind of overrides individual creation. So say like through my research last week, I had researched this guy called Josh Dubs in VR chat, and this influencer called Josh Dubs, this little kid was repeating a phrase from him. In some ways he was being influenced by Josh Dubs. And I guess there's like a line between influence and possessed. Maybe I'm just being too cheeky within the term, but I think in some ways that kid didn't have autonomy over the creation and the reflection and the fractions of the self, of the origin. In some ways it was not. If Josh Dubs had said that, it would have been a little bit different. But he didn't say that. It was some kid that was parroting, or in some ways in response. But there is a way that it wasn't, I guess there is a necessary way. Because in some ways I am being possessed by Derrida's understanding of ontological, because its theoretical baseline that I'm proposing in posthuman ethics is to look beyond the human, criticize the human, and look beyond it and understand that there is like a metaphysical realm of ideas and forms of contradiction. But I wouldn't say I'm necessarily possessed, but more influenced, because I'm able to understand his ideas and create new connections through that, rather than parroting. Yeah. I guess how would even one be original? I mean, that's another question. But I think it starts with being genuine. Being genuine comes from that origin, but it is also reflected within the culture and reflected within a broader understanding of the environment and also of the individual. This mixture is important, and it's important to understand the influences of the environment and influences of the individual. And I guess one of the age-old questions is what to do about it. And I think that in some ways there could be external forces and internal forces. And for example, like an internal force would be an essence of meditation, and an aspect of changing one's mind and being able to have contentment and make the best of it, to say in layman's terms. But then external would be like making sure like your mom has like enough money to, I guess, in forms of like direct action and like helping out with mutual aid and stuff, and making sure like people have food and people have, you know, I guess in some ways it's becoming like Christ. In some ways it doesn't have to be demonstrated within the Catholic terms. It's almost just being human and just being, just being. And while talking about this, I feel like it's important to stress that in some ways altering environment doesn't have to be through action. It can also be through non-action, such in Taoist thought and stuff. I've always kind of hold this truth dearly, is that a wise man said nothing. You know, it's almost like sometimes having silence, like to hear the wind, to hear the siren, to hear the crunch, is also valuable and important, useful data. And I think that's something that can be expanded within virtual environments and aspects. Because in many ways, these virtual environments are too a part of the natural world, because they are formed from cobalt and precious materials and glass and stuff like that came from the earth. And to be ethically is to also understand that the materials in creating the internet should also be coming from the same process. In a way, it could be almost linked to a spiritual aspect, questioning the origin. Why am I here? Who made this so-called metal fence with yellow stairs? God? Man? Ghosts? Maybe the unknown. My personal stance is that it's kind of a silly question to ask. I mean, I'm already here. I might as well experience. It seems like a question that can't be answered. The origin. Like, who made these cars and, well, workers, but who made workers? Family. Who made family? Like an ideal? Who knows? I think that's why the research going into posthuman ethics is wondering how to investigate the world during contemporary times of cyborgs and aspects of new technology. And something also to point out is that I think if you look at being genuine and being authentic, like, what would the consideration towards substances and aspects? So for example, like in VR chat, they would have like a virtual bar, and they would have people would get drunk and they would chat it up and they would have a social space. So can you hold yourself into the origin if you're under a substance? I think in some ways you can, in some ways you can't. There's there's different limitations. Yeah, I guess that's something to think about too. The looking into that posthuman aspect is that, well, wouldn't it be ethically to say someone is not in the right mind, in the right framework, or maybe not right framework, but say they have mental illness and stuff like that, these are people that we should also care for within the virtual world and virtual space, and have environments designed for them and designed for VR and AR. So how would that work, especially with someone if they dissociate from reality and stuff? It would be, I guess you would have to define what reality is in order to understand what's not and what's away from it, or what the essence of reality is, in order to understand how it would be taken away. And I guess maybe through modern science, but I also understand that some people, there is a framework out there that also understands that science is still not the best. It's the best thing we have, but it's not a concrete example of truth, or in ways it's a good ways of obtaining it, but I think in some ways there could be something that could be beyond it. So I think how I've personally dealt with this ghost, or this fracture of self within others being influenced and so-called being possessed, is that I've kind of isolated my identity and my realm of existence, so which had some positives, because I was able to cultivate my artistic voice and have a real understanding of who I am, and also a great understanding of learning and have value and stuff. But also there's kind of this alienation that you feel. It's kind of something that is not really talked about in society, and I think, well, it's talked in other ways. It's talked about oh, I'm lonely, or I'm alone, but not necessarily in the ways of alienation, and alienation from the collective, and alienation from this world and stuff. And I think in some ways there is escapism within VR chat, and being able to have online friends and gamer friends and stuff like that. But I've never really had that experience till I went into VR chat and had talked to some people. I wouldn't say there are close bonds, but I would say there is definitely something to it. And I see the appeal of why people would want to have a social space within the virtual reality, because in many ways, I don't know I live in an apartment, so it's I don't know who the people are below me, the floor below, and I don't really know the people that are on my floor either. And this close proximity, or this, I guess even before COVID too, I think a lot of people were experiencing alienation from society as well, And I think that also plays into a fact of why it's important to understand this realm of how do I be authentic with being posthuman, and how do I be authentic within society at large. And yeah, and I guess like one of the part of the definition of posthuman is being, I had while doing the research, was that it was someone who had different perspectives and someone who had different amalgamations of ideas and stuff. And I think what's important is that how do you deal with the contradiction within two different frameworks? And yeah, you could say, okay, easy one, like politics, but it could be even more complex than politics. It would be like fundamentally thinking, well, politics is everything, but it more than like bureaucratic politics is what I mean. And I think in some ways it's I don't know, it's some way that something's something to be thought about. And I think Hegel has an idea of, you have the thesis and the synthesis, or the antithesis, and then you come to a synthesis, which is dialectics. And I think that's probably one of the best ways in looking into to materialism and aspects of idealism too. And it seems like it's very it's contradictory. Like, so how do you make sense of contradiction in society with technology? And I think that's probably one of the forefronts, maybe the main question of posthuman ethics, is understanding this contradiction and how to deal with it within contemporary society, and also society in a couple of years, such as through the advances of transhumanism and the advances of other aspects that are related, like such as having 3D bioprinting and aspects of 3D printing and aspects of different forms. So I think in some ways there's two like distinct paths one can take. One is like a spiritual path, and one is kind of more a materialist path. But I think having the synthesis between these two realms, two ideas of thought, of looking at internal and external agents and affect and environments, basically, or realms of existence and consciousness, is the place to start. And yeah, hopefully you guys like this kind of maybe off the cuff vlog, video essay thing. I'm not really too sure, just trying it out. I think it's important for me to, when typing, it can be very hard to explain idealism, while materially I can also represent it too, such as like diagrams, or like the representation of having a photo into an image, or an image into a 3D render to likeness of myself. But I think also it's important for me to have this Socratic dialogue and to question things and to not really have an open mind about it. And sometimes it's not necessarily about getting the answer, it's about asking the right question, and it's about understanding what is to be done. So signing off, stay safe,